Okay, so welcome everybody to the Solar Tuesday. Does anybody have anything specifically, issues to raise, things like that? I can put you on the agenda here as we move forward. Yeah, Bill, you got something?
Sure, I have two questions. Last Tuesday, you alluded to the possibility that the tax credit perhaps had morphed to a payment regardless of whether you owe taxes. And I
Right.
haven't been able to find out whether that's additional information on that.
Yeah, I think that's part of the Biden proposal. So it's not a fact as of this point, but it is one of the provisions. And since that proposal has not actually, I think, been written as a law, so it may or may not get into the final bill, but that's what's being bandied about at this point.
Great. The other question is a little bit techie here. So there's a glider airport near Houston that we're going to put in 5 kW of ground mount, and the array will be maybe 70 feet from a lockable disconnect and the breaker box. And the question came up, do you run the PV to the breaker box and the inverter, or do you place the inverter at the PV and run AC voltage back to the breaker box and lockable disconnect? And of course, being mindful of voltage drop.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter. The only reason I wouldn't put an inverter out at the PV array is primarily just weather and security. You know, somebody with some bolt cutters could run off with a $2,000 piece of equipment. Voltage drop is more a factor of the amount of voltage as opposed to whether it's AC or DC. From my reading, there's no inherent advantage to having AC current versus DC for voltage. It's really just how high is the voltage. So you might actually find that you get less voltage drop if you're running 600 volts, say, from the array to the inverter, as opposed to inverting it to 240. And then, you know, you're going to get an increased amount of voltage drop. So I guess if I were designing it, I would put the inverter somewhere more secure, you know, and just run it straight. But I would put a disconnect out there at the array if it's that far away.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Well, yeah. There's a disconnect. It's an SMA inverter. There's I believe, a DC disconnect there at the bottom of the inverter.
Yeah.
But you're suggesting, yeah, I understand. 500 volts coming 70 feet, it'd be appropriate to.
Yeah, it's just good. It's just good to be able to disconnect it as close to the source as possible. You know, so when you go to make your connection, you know, at a junction box or a combiner box or however you're going to do it, I just put a DC disconnect out there at the array so that you can shut it off there. Then you have to, by code, have a DC disconnect within 10 feet of the inverter. That's usually built into the inverter in some way. So that's the second DC disconnect.
Okay. So back to the Biden bill, is that a question of whether Congress amends and or passes it?
I think what the way it works, yeah, you know, they come up with the proposal, but then it's up to Congress to actually write the bill. And then, of course, you get a House version and a Senate version, and then they have to go through reconciliation. So what's stated in Time magazine might be very different than what's, you know, on the paper when it's passed. So,
right.
But that seemed like a really good provision, especially for retirees or people who are not in a tax liability situation. Be a good motivation to go out there and install solar. They also talked about extending that tax credit to, you know, another 10 years. So that would be great. That's all good news. Let's see, did someone else have, James, you had a question?
Yeah, I'm working on a standalone off the grid. It's for a meter, you know, gas meter. It's out in the middle of a field. And my question is, so it's all self-contained, sitting right next to each other, batteries. So if I'm looking down, I'm looking at a sketch. So from the panels to the charge controller to the batteries, my question is, well, I have two questions. One is, does the power to the device come off the batteries or off the charge controller?
It comes off the batteries.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And I was working with somebody and they had said, oh no, the charge controller has like another output, but that's not.
It can, but it's basically just a pass through from the battery to the DC load. Oftentimes you'll have a charge controller that'll have a DC load port. And then you assume you're going to run from the batteries to an inverter where you're converting to AC load. So you're bypassing the inverter with that, because you don't need it for a DC load. Is your load all DC on your system?
Just a small gas meter, remote meter on a gas well.
Is it a DC load or is it an AC?
12 volt. No, it's 12 volt DC load.
Yeah, well, you can run it through your charge controller if from a wire management sense, that makes more sense, or you can connect it directly to the battery. Either way is going to work.
Okay.
But you can just think about that port on your charge controller as just a wire doubling back from your battery through that other port.
Okay. And then, the instructions were on the batteries, you need 3 days worth of power in case, 3 days of snow on this device. We got that figured out. But if it's 3 days of snow, rain, whatever, and then for the next 5 days, it's just as bad. I mean, then we're just out of luck, right? I mean, that like to put enough panels in to try and charge on a, moderately sunny day would just be too many panels. I mean, because we could do this whole thing with just a couple of panels, on one sunny day. But all right, so that's we're just out of luck. We're just at the mercy.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those things where you could put in a bigger battery bank, for additional storage capacity, like more days of autonomy, or you could put in a bigger solar array to recharge them quicker. But either way, it's always a balance between cost, and the practical aspect of what you're installing.
All right. Okay. And then one last thing, this is on a more personal one. I have panels I was installing on my garage, and then I ended up moving before I put them on. So now they're going to go on my new house, but it's it's on a 2-story part of the house. So it's a walkout, and that's the side of the roof that the panels are going on. Well, I'm a little nervous to do that. When I was on the garage roof, I was more comfortable with it to do that. Now that's a 2-story, I'm not. Okay, so I was calling some of the big companies, like, hey, can you just, pay for a couple of your guys to come out and, put the racking system in the panels, but then I was going to do all the wiring through the attic and everything. So some companies are like, nah, we're doing all or nothing. We're not coming out. I got the permit and everything. So maybe anybody online here. Does anybody know anybody I'm in Akron, so north of, say, Mansfield or Massillon or something, that has a company, small, 2 guys in a pickup truck, kind of solar. I don't want to put somebody, if it's just a weekend, person, amateur like me doing it, I don't want to put them at risk. But if it's a professional and that's what they do and they're used to all that. So.
Yeah, well, I hired, what's his name? Oh, Jay, you would know. Eco House Solar. What's it? Do you remember his name?
Yeah, I do, but it'll come to me. It's a senior thing. I'm trying to remember.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, I just hired him by the hour to put up just the bare rack or the racking and the panels, and I did all the rest. And he's very comfortable on 2-story roofs.
Isn't it Kevin?
Kevin Eigel. Kevin Eigel. Yeah.
Okay.
And he charged $50 an hour back in 2014.
But see, he's in Columbus and you're up in Akron, so it might be a little difficult. We can put a little announcement out on Ohio Solar Installers, the Facebook page, see if somebody wants to take it on as a project. If you send me an email, I'll post that.
All right.
On that, we've got about 300 folks on that list that do solar. How many racks, how many panels are you talking about?
It's just 6, yeah, so it's not big. It's, yeah, I already got the racking, Iron Ridge racking, got everything. Yeah, it's just 6, so it's like a one-day job, you know, and I would be working.
Worried about falling?
Yeah.
Pardon?
Are you
Well,
worried
you-
about falling?
Yeah, I mean, I've got the, just for my other work that I do, the harnesses and all that, but I mean, figuring out where do I run the rope to on the roof? I know there's things, I would just be YouTubing it, like how do you,
Sure.
you know, I to put it on the roof, and I'd rather, you know.
Just
it's
sling it over and tie it to the bumper of your car. That's always a good idea, you know?
Make sure nobody drives away.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, take the keys away from your wife. That's, you know, that's important. So,
You can fling it over and stick it in a window with a 2x4 or something. You know, that's
Yeah.
pretty easy.
we've actually done it, used four-wheelers, you know, as a, you know, when you're out doing a barn or something, run it over the top of the barn and run the wire down and then tie it off to the four-wheeler. But, you know, it is no joke to make sure nobody drives off while you're doing that. You know, depending on the pitch of the roof, you know, once you have one rail in, it's kind of, you know, pretty basic. You're just using that as a backstop, you know, for your feet.
Yeah.
But, you know, it is OSHA required that if you can fall more than, what is it, like 6 feet, you got to be tied off with a harness and lanyard.
Yeah.
Although I don't know that that's always followed. Let's just assume it is always followed. So,
And of course, the homeowner has the natural selection exemption.
yeah. You're assumed to be expendable, so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, well, yeah,
Has anyone ever tried tamarack racking?
Tamarack, I'm not familiar with them.
Yeah, I saw it advertised on the wind and solar, Northern Arizona, big solar retailer. Anyway, it's an open channel aluminum, so you can actually put the wiring inside the channel, as opposed to like what are the other ones? Can't remember at the moment now.
Yeah, like Iron Ridge or something where you just clip it to the thing.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Right. But here you can actually put the wire inside the channel, and the end clamps are the same as the mid clamps.
Yeah.
You don't buy two different kind of clamps.
Yeah,
So
although I know Iron Ridge's system has gone to that as well. The mid clamp and the end clamps are the same. They just have a little semicircular dress out thing that clips on it for the end clamps.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I've never heard of it, but that's a good idea. There are so many different types of racking systems out there that it's amazing how many options there are. I suspect we'll see, like, I don't know, inverters seem to be going down to just a few. I wonder if racks and panels will go down to just a few. All right, if there are no other questions or items, I'll hit some of the news, and then I wanted to talk about the House Bill 6 scandal here in Ohio. If anybody's interested in that, it's always good to get into corruption. I was looking online, I saw that 375 megawatt solar array going into Western Ohio, and Amazon has just signed to buy all of the power coming from that array. So that's an interesting development. When you look, it just seems that there's another huge array going in Ohio, you know, every week. So we're going to start to see some of that. Some of the work there, it's kind of interesting how different it is than residential, because typically what happens is they'll contract with a local union, and then the local union will just provide essentially laborers, because think about a big solar array like that. Most of the installation is going to be pretty specialized. You'll get folks coming in who are all they're doing it's hauling panels and bolting them to racks. You know, that's all they do all day long. And then they'll get some electrical guys to come in and make the final connections. So pretty industrial scale type situations, but a lot of work going on there. There was a recent survey in solar, 5-year survey, trying to find out residential customers, why they're doing what they're doing, why they're installing systems. Thought it was, you know, sort of Captain Obvious, but it's also interesting. The number one reason is people save money with solar. So that's the number one reason for installing solar, is to save money on their utility bill. The secondary reason was resilience. So if they had a disruption of some sort, and you would assume in those cases, they would probably install some sort of battery system into their installation. And the third reason was environment, you know, that it helps the planet. I suspect that's a fairly distant third, but it's always funny because people try and sell it as the number one reason often, and people just aren't motivated by, you know, it's sort of like they claim they are, but they're not. They're motivated by money. That's their primary motivation. 11.5% of those systems had batteries. Most of the batteries have been installed in the last year. So that's a really booming area. The major barrier to installing solar was the upfront cost, which again makes sense. And for those who do the installation, the average was from lead to install about 3 months. So if you're thinking about that from a business perspective, apparently that's about what happens. And again, that kind of makes sense. From the time somebody decides to install solar to the time it starts to happen, it's going to be about a 3-month period. And then I just saw that there was a report saying that now in the United States, 3 million people are employed in the sustainable energy world, or the renewable energy world, or in the United States. Of that number, because that number struck me as relatively high, you know, higher than what you'd normally hear, about 500,000 are in renewable energy. So that would be the solar and wind guys primarily. And that number is more typically what you hear, around 400,000 in solar, 100,000 in wind, you know, in that range. 2,100,000 in energy efficiency industry, which that's where the big numbers come in. And then it was curious to see about 137,000 in the storage battery industries, and 273,000 in clean vehicles. Not really sure how they define clean vehicles. I assume that's hybrids and electric. And then 37,000 in clean fuels. So those were some interesting tidbits of news. Anybody have a comment or a question arise from that? Okay. If not, I'm gonna share a screen. I've got some notes here, and the reason, not that the notes are real illuminating, but mostly I can't remember all of this. So I'm gonna go ahead and jump to my notes. And I thought it was interesting because there's been new developments on the House Bill 6 scandal here in Ohio. And I just, we're getting ready to do a radio program on it. So I was researching this. So I thought, oh, well, it's good for me to review it and also just to share it a little bit. But to take you back a little bit, House Bill 6 was the FirstEnergy nuclear power plant bailout issue. And back in, I think it was 2018, or 2019, they passed this bill. And it was curious when I was teaching some of the classes, because the students, several students raised it as an issue, saying, how come Ohio just passed this bill? that basically gave huge bailouts to two nuclear power plants, huge bailouts to 2 aging coal power plants, and gutted all of the renewable energy standards within the state. And they did it at a time when almost everybody else was transitioning to renewables. And I was joking, but not joking, saying, hey, it's very classic, you know, FirstEnergy gives you $1 million, you give them $1 billion. That's the way our government works, you know. Well, it turns out it was like $60 million FirstEnergy gave them. And they did it through a company called Generation Now. It was a nonprofit organization. FirstEnergy put about $60 million into this. And then that money was funneled through Larry Householder. And Larry Householder was Speaker of the House here in Ohio. And where I sit, I'm actually in Zanesville, home of Larry Householder, which is always good. We seem to generate a lot of corrupt politicians in this region. It's funny, just as an aside, when I first came back from living in Europe, our congressman was the guy who was embroiled in some, he was embroiled in a scandal, taking bribes. And he was the guy who proposed that you rename French fries to freedom fries because it was patriotic to do so. And I went to this meeting and he was speaking, and I was sitting at one of the tables, and these 2 ladies were sitting there and saying, you know, it's a shame he's a crook because I really like him, you know. And I was thinking, you know what, they'd vote for him. They don't care. They'll vote for him again. And of course, I was being really bad because he did a little question and answer thing afterwards, sort of informally. And it was still while he was under investigation, and nobody had raised the whole thing that he was under investigation for taking bribes. So I walked up and I said, well, Congressman, I just have a question for you. Did you do it? Did you do what you're accused of doing? Did you take money? And of course, that was like, oh my God, you could almost hear this collective gasp. And he must have like grabbed a hold of me, and he wanted to keep me in the room, telling me how it was all a liberal media commie plot, and he was innocent, and he didn't even play golf, and of course he didn't have a sack of money when he came back from Europe, and he was like all this stuff. And I went away thinking, I even told my wife, I said, you know what? He was absolutely sincere when he told me that, and he is guilty as sin. You know, he had that ability of completely divorcing himself from himself. And then, of course, like 3 weeks later, he pleaded guilty and went to jail and found God, and now he's a minister or something, but he was selling gold coins or whatever. I mean, this is the way it works. So, yeah. So anyway, Householder, this, you know, it's amazing. It's like the deeper you go into this stuff, you just can't make it up because these people are so sleazy. But he was a Perry County commissioner, elected to the House in '97. By 2001, he worked a deal where the Speaker of the House was resigning. So instead of having a big fight, he and this other representative, Bill Harris, came to a power sharing agreement where he would become Speaker for a year, then the other guy would be Speaker for the year. Well, he got in there and then refused to give it up, reneged on the deal, and became permanent Speaker. So why would you think this guy will renege? Anyway, so he then was Speaker of the House, and he got involved in a bunch of scandals involving kickbacks, and he ended up being essentially drummed out of the House of Representatives, had to resign because he was under investigation by the FBI. They ultimately blamed a couple of his subordinates, and he went back to become auditor of Perry County. So he controlled the money of Perry County, where he was immediately embroiled in some scandals there for diverting money to people who were working on his restaurant for not, you know, government money, people working on his stuff and basically being on the payroll. But they didn't do anything to him. And then back in 2016, he ran again and got 72% of the vote in the district. So, I mean, just to give you a sense of this region, the last time I voted, the only Democratic candidate on the ballot was for president. So there were no Democrats even running for the local offices. It's so embarrassing. So, you can't even do a protest vote. So
The districts are so gerrymandered.
yeah, I've actually been in 4 different congressional districts since I moved back, but I haven't moved. The districts have been moved around me, and I've never once actually got to vote for my congressman until this last time, because they keep moving different congressmen in and out and around about. And my congressman gets involved in all of this because I wanted to back up a little bit before the real scandal to a previous scandal. Not a scandal. It was never even told about being a scandal, but to me it was. If you think about renewable energy, really in Ohio from a legislative standpoint, it all started in 2008 when Ohio passed a renewable energy portfolio standard. And they set the goal of 12.5% from renewables by the year 2025, which was not very aggressive, but it was something. And that sort of set the whole rec market and everything. And it passed almost unanimously. It was not a political thing. Then 5 years later, FirstEnergy, the American Natural Gas Association, the Ohio Chamber of Commerce, they come in with a bunch of money and they start to try and get it repealed because it had penalties for the utilities if they didn't comply. So my congressman, Troy Balderson, or my state representative or state senator at that point, was chairman of this energy committee. So they held hearings to determine whether they should do away with the renewable energy portfolio standard. And I actually went up to Columbus and testified at this hearing. And there were 129 people testifying at the hearing. 128 were against the repeal of the standard, and 1 person was for it, who was a representative from FirstEnergy, Ohio. And he got to speak first, of course. He spoke. Then pretty much every Republican member on the committee left the room, and 128 people testified against it. And then we were ignored. The Republicans came back in the room and voted to repeal the law. So that was it was my first time testifying in a government hearing and seeing firsthand how useless it is to testify in a government hearing, because it was kabuki theater. It was nobody's minds were going to be changed. Nobody cared. It was all for show. And then, of course, John Kasich vetoed that bill, which was interesting because he was running for president. So they kept the standard, and it was in place, even though relatively weak. So for the next couple of years, FirstEnergy started lobbying, trying to get a bailout for the nuclear and also still to get rid of these portfolio standards. They couldn't get enough support, so they convinced Larry Householder to run for Speaker of the House. I'm sure it didn't take a lot of convincing, but ultimately, in retrospect, now we find out they started funneling millions of dollars into people's campaigns if they would support Larry Householder. They gave money to DeWine. They gave money basically to everybody. I mean, it's hard to there. And this is not, it's a Republican scandal primarily because the Republicans are in power. If the Democrats had been in power, it would be a Democratic scandal. It's whoever holds the purse strings. They couldn't get quite enough votes for the bailout of the nuclear power plants. So they threw in a couple of coal power plants and got a couple more congressmen to jump on board. So they added in the bailout of 2 coal power plants, one in Indiana, which can't quite figure out why Ohio taxpayers are paying to bail out a coal power plant in Indiana, but that's what it took apparently.
Jay,
And
does the power come across the river or across the state line?
yeah, I don't know, except it is owned in part by AEP, who is
Okay.
located in
Well,
Ohio.
that could be it right there. Yeah,
Yeah.
Columbus, yeah.
Now, at the time, it was so egregious. This bill was just so blatantly pay to play that people just were up in arms about it. Of course, nobody cared in the legislature. They assume it'll just go away. So there was a effort to try and block the law from taking place with a petition to have the voters vote on it. And so they filed to do the petition. They were given 90 days to gather 265,000 signatures in this petition to get it on the ballot. But the Secretary of State withheld approval for the process to begin for 38 days into the 90-day period. So they really only had, 32 days to gather this. They filed a court action to try and get it extended to extend to the full 90 days, but they were denied. So, so then they began to petition. Well, FirstEnergy ended up funding to the tune of over $16 million anti-petition activism. Now the 16 million was only what they had to report. Apparently they said in the article I read, didn't include lobbyists, whatever. And they started sending out things saying these petitions were not about the power plant. It was an organized effort by the Chinese government to gather your information so they could steal your identity. So, and we got letters in the mail, we got everything telling us the Chinese were coming for us. And if you sign it, you may as well kiss your bank accounts goodbye. You know, and they actually started going up to people who were collecting the petition signatures and offering to pay them $2,500 if they would stop gathering petition signatures. So it was quite a overt anti-petition thing. Ultimately, it didn't happen, and the bill became law, and everybody signed it. So what was in the law? Well, there were a couple of things. It was kind of interesting here. Whoops, let me see. Yeah, is one thing that didn't get much play is a provision called decoupling. And the decoupling thing basically said FirstEnergy would be guaranteed the same amount of profits it had gotten in 2018, which was their record year of profits, whether they sold any energy or not. Now, the argument was if you reduce the amount of energy people are consuming, that's good for everybody. So therefore, the utility should profit by not selling energy. And that was viewed to be as much as $355 million in unearned revenue by 2024. There was over $1 billion in bailouts from the nuclear power plants. Another bailouts for the 2 coal power plants. It did, in fact, gut and eliminate the renewable portfolio standards, taking it from 12.5 down to 8.5, down to 0. So essentially doing away with the portfolio standard and gutting any of the efficiency standards. So these were the main provisions. And this became Ohio law. Then, of course, the FBI got involved because it turned out Householder was using a bunch of the money to pay off lawsuits and doing work on his vacation homes. And some of the other lobbyists were paying, you know, using money to pay off debts and stuff that were involved. And so they came up with an 82-page affidavit. The FBI came in, arrested Larry Householder, arrested 4 of the other lobbyist guys, hauled them off to jail, but they're all released on their own recognizance because they're such upstanding citizens. And now that's where we stand. That's, you know, it's under investigation. Everybody is clearly innocent except those who are now starting to plead guilty. And but the thing that actually was the recent development is DeWine, who it should be reminded was one of the recipients of the money from all of this, said, let's put it behind us. Let's just repeal this law. So in April of this year, just recently, a couple of weeks ago, they repealed the law, except they didn't. They got rid of the nuclear bailout. And actually, it looked like because the federal law, because the Biden administration had changed some of the things, the bailout wasn't going to work anyway. They got rid of the decoupling thing, which basically meant you get paid for not selling energy. And as part of that settlement, FirstEnergy had already received $100 million, so they agreed to give $26 million back. So there's a good deal. And
Sounds
then
like sounds like farm subsidies.
yeah.
Get paid to not produce.
Yep.
Sorry, I didn't interrupt.
No, that's quite all right. And they gutted the, they left in the provisions to gut all of the renewable energy portfolio standards, all of the efficiency standards, and they left in the subsidies for the coal power plants. So they didn't really get rid of everything. They only got rid of some things. And there were a couple of little things. Oh, FirstEnergy did step in and fire their CEO after, the guy's name is Chuck Jones, which I think is funny because that's the illustrator for the old Bugs Bunny cartoons. I remember Chuck Jones being the guy. I'm sure it's not the same guy, just saying. And but I had written it in here somewhere just to see how punished this poor guy who got fired was.
You know, a golden parachute.
Yeah. Well, he had gotten paid. Oh, it says documents filed earlier in the lawsuit show that Jones had earned more than $70 million in salary since 2016. So, you know, it strikes me weird that a public utility that's guaranteed a profit is allowed basically to compensate in those ways and to spend that kind of money in lobby. It just, I don't know, it just seems like it might lead to corruption. You know, I'm just saying, but, you know, it seems like there should be some constraints there. So anyway, and it was basically, oh, one curious factor, and I'll need to do some more research on this, but they were saying that they diverted $60 million, right? That's how much went to this shell corporation, but only $375,000 show up as campaign contributions to the political candidates. So I guess if I were somebody in a position of authority, I would wonder where the rest of that money is going or went.
Turks and Caicos.
Yeah, yeah, I know. It's like that old line from Lily Tomlin. No matter how cynical I get, it's never enough. So I just thought that was worth a quick little recap there, only because it's terrible. And it's so local to home here. Yep. So does anybody else have anything before we call it a meeting? Yeah, Bill?
Yeah, I'm right now, I did Earth Day on Saturday, and I kind of depleted a 24-volt battery, so I'm charging it now through a charge controller. And I was intrigued when I first hooked it up. The series voltage, open circuit voltage, is like 60, 70 volts, but the charge controller only showed it about 30 volts. And I was curious about that. And it turns out it was just a question of the charge controller doing its MPPT, perturb and observe thing. And it has finally risen to 60 volts and transforming it down to 24-volt battery voltage. I thought that was interesting. It took more than a few minutes to, adjust the operating point on the IV curves.
Oh,
I
okay.
just found that interesting.
Yeah, that is. You would think that it would be a little more instantaneous than that, but
I would agree.
yeah. Tim, did you have something?
Yeah, could you post those links on the chat?
Oh, on the scandal thing or on something else?
Yeah, right. Anything that anybody's done today. I came in late.
Oh, okay.
See what it posted.
Yeah, what I've been doing is I've been going ahead and posting the whole session,
Okay.
on our website, and so I'll continue to do that. But we're going to be recording a radio program about the Larry Householder thing, in case. I think I'll have to make sure I put the word allegedly in bold letters on everything, just to keep us from being sued, allegedly,
Absolutely.
So he is allegedly a crook. Yeah, Jay?
This makes me feel like I really should adopt Ohio as my home. I've been mostly in Ohio since 1980, but I'm from the suburbs of Chicago. So, I've always figured I had enough political corruption in my genes from Illinois to suffice, but maybe Ohio is as bizarre as Illinois is.
Yeah.
This is just a tidbit, and I may have the wrong person, but somewhere as this was all breaking in the news, was there a totally unrelated thing about the Householder family, that they had a child that was suffocated by a the switch on an electric window in their car that had something to do with switching so that your default pressure on the windows would take them down and not up?
Yeah, I don't know. That's something I haven't run across, but stranger things have happened, I mean,
it happened to somebody, and just the name Householder, which didn't mean much to me at the time, but I think they lost a child to that kind of tragedy, independent of, sort of like this guy within miles of where I'm sitting right now, whether or not he was it was not the victim of the murder that was on trial here in Minneapolis, but it shows that tragedy can happen no matter who you are, including if you're a crook.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
you're saying he's going to use that as a defense?
Getting arrested is a tragedy.
Yeah. Yeah, I
One
don't
more
know
thing.
that it'd be a defense, but yeah, he was appointed to as chairman of the ethics committee when he got reelected in the House. So that's
Like,
appropriate. Yeah, Tim,
North
you had something
Korea.
else?
Oh yeah, just Steve Stivers is not going to run for Congress, so there's a chance of getting a renewable energy friendly congressperson in there. So.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, there's a process I've seen anyway, done over and over and over again within our district, within our area, where a Republican incumbent will run for reelection, get reelected, and then immediately resign to take a position at one of the local utility companies, and then appoint a utility lobbyist to fill that vacant spot, so that they then run as the incumbent the next time. And that's happened over and over.
He's got a job at the Chamber of Commerce.
Oh, does he?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, our guy recently resigned. We had two of them. One left to become the head of the American Natural Gas Association, and then the other guy left to become the head of our electrical co-op. So that was, and they were both replaced by petroleum lobbyists. coal and petroleum lobbyists. So, as I've said many times, we in the renewable energy industry need to get better at buying off legislators. So that there can be these scandals about us too. Yeah.
I thought we'd be better off with sunshine laws.
Yeah, right. Vince, you had something?
If it makes you feel any better, I'm on the board of the local utility and we don't get anything.
Yeah.
So, but actually I have a general question. Implementation of smart grid standards. I mean, I'm meeting some, I'm trying to introduce that to the small utility, just the sensors, controls, storage, production, and I'm getting our GM, general manager, he's very competent, but he's also somewhat, it's not that he's resistant to new ideas, it's that he doesn't see it being possible. But, the DOE has a substantial number of programs. In fact, they have a really good software system that allows you to develop a smart grid from the ground up. And I guess my question is if you know of any local examples where that's been implemented. I mean, a lot of this stuff is going to depend on more and more electric cars coming in for more storage, demand side adjustments, second to second adjustments within the microgrid. But anyway, like your experience with that or implementation of that.
No, I don't really. I've heard a lot of discussion about it, but it always seems to be theoretical. I don't know of any specific utilities in this region for sure that have really implemented a full smart grid protocol. You hear a lot of people referring to the smart grid, but often they're just talking about smart meters. And I always tell them, look, that's like saying the internet is a modem. That's just a portal to the smart grid. So it's worth maybe doing some research. Tim, is that about the smart grid there, the ILSR?
It's a website that I post a lot of shows on for the Institute of Local Self-Reliance. And there's some podcasts in there, a lot of articles that might tag up to what you're thinking, what you're looking for, because there's a lot of things that have been done across the country with small communities. So yeah, check it out. I think you might find it somewhat useful.
And that sounds great. And like I said, DOE has a substantial interconnection, smart grid, updated grid program. At Fort Collins is actually within, I think 3 to 4 years is going to be completely energy. It's still going to be grid connected, but it's going to be energy neutral because of the way it distributes demand and storage and production. And then there are a number of in smaller specific cases like, large production facilities. But in any case, I'd be happy to send the link with.
Yeah, put that link in there. That'd be great.
Yeah, if you could, Vince, send me something on that. I'll do some research. Maybe we can do that as a topic, on one of the future sessions.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
All right. Okay. Yeah, Jay, you have something?
Quickie question, is the microchip shortage hitting in any particular way solar or windmills?
I haven't heard anything about that, no. I don't imagine. I mean, I didn't even hear about a microchip shortage, so could be going below my radar.
Well, it's what's knocking down vehicle production in a lot of the companies right now.
Oh, okay. Is that a COVID thing?
No, I think it's just a supply thing and then drought in Taiwan, so they're not getting, the plants are not able to ramp up production.
Okay, let's blame the boat in the Suez Canal. That sounds like a good reason for lack of microchip. So
Jay, if you want an actual thing, my company just told me that we can't implement. We had computer systems that were on that boat. We actually had them on there, yes. I burst out laughing this morning when they told us.
It reminds me of one time we were trying to buy a house in Florida. And we were wondering why we hadn't heard anything about it. And it turned out the guy who was processing our paperwork was shot and killed by a coworker and dropped dead on top of our papers. And they were all confiscated as part of the criminal investigation. And we weren't allowed to hear anything about it.
That sounds like that's Carl Hyacin making that up.
I know, but it was Florida. It's just what you expect.
Yeah, it's Florida.
All right, well, let's call it a meeting, and we'll get together again next Tuesday. All right, thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Have a good week. Yeah.